The evening began like any other busy night for her. She tied her apron, brushed off a bit of flour from the front, and took a deep breath before stepping onto the restaurant floor. The place was already loud with talking, laughter, and clinking glasses. It was one of those high-end restaurants where guests dressed as if every dinner was a special event, and the staff spent the entire shift trying to act calm, even when everything felt chaotic. She moved from table to table with a practiced smile, placing dishes gently so they wouldn't make noise, asking guests if they needed anything else, and rushing back to the kitchen whenever an order was ready. She liked working, but some nights felt heavier than others. Tonight felt like that. The moment she walked in, she sensed something different in the air. Maybe it was because the restaurant had been reserved for a private gathering, a group of wealthy business people, including a billionaire known for his sharp tongue and bigger ego. Everyone on the staff had been warned to be extra careful. The manager gave one of those speeches that made it sound like the entire future of the restaurant depended on one smooth evening. So everyone moved quietly, politely, almost nervously. No one wanted to make a mistake. She understood. Tips were good on nights like this, but the pressure was real. She was pouring water for one of the guests when she saw him walk in. The billionaire didn't look like he belonged there. Something about the way he stepped into the room made it seem like the room belonged to him. He didn't have to say a word. People just stepped aside. Conversations lowered. Even the manager stiffened when greeting him. She kept her eyes down, hoping he wouldn't notice her. Not because she was scared, but because she didn't want any trouble. She liked quiet nights where she could go home tired but peaceful. Guests like him rarely made that possible. As dinner went on, his group grew louder. They laughed too loudly, argued about things ordinary people didn't understand, and made small comments that made it clear they didn't see the staff as people. She did her best not to take anything personally. She had learned long ago that some guests were just like that. It wasn't until dessert time that everything changed. She was carrying a tray of small plates chocolate mousse, berry tarts, little things designed to be eaten in 2 or 3 bites, when she heard one of the guests mention the piano in the corner of the room. The restaurant kept it mostly for decoration. It was old but polished often, and almost no one ever played it. "Why is there a piano here?" one man said, laughing. "What is this, a concert hall?" "It's for the atmosphere," another answered. "Makes the place feel more classy, I guess." The billionaire looked at it for a long moment, then turned to the staff. His voice carried across the entire room. "Does anyone here play?" Everyone froze. A few waiters glanced at each other, silently praying he wouldn't single them out. She kept her eyes on the tray, hoping to pass unnoticed. But someone from the back, a young busboy, who didn't know better, spoke too quickly. "She does." Her heart dropped. She felt the tray go heavier in her hands. Slowly, she looked up. The billionaire was staring directly at her. "Oh, really?" he said with a smirk. "You play?" She felt every pair of eyes in the room shift toward her. Heat crept up her neck. She cleared her throat. "I used to," she said softly. "A long time ago." "That means yes," he replied. "Go on then. Play something." Her breath stuck. She shook her head. "Sir, I'm working." "I still have tables to—" "Nonsense," he interrupted, waving his hand. "You can take 5 minutes to give us a tune. Consider it part of tonight's entertainment." Some of the guests chuckled. She felt embarrassment spread through her chest, but also something sharper, something like hurt. He wasn't asking. He was ordering, the way one might command a pet to perform a trick. Her manager hurried to her side, whispering, "Just go, please. We don't want to upset him." Of course. That was always the answer. Don't upset the rich man. Don't disappoint the guest who believes money gives him control over everyone in the room. She swallowed her frustration. She didn't want to lose her job. Rent was due soon. Bills were waiting. Life didn't give her enough room to fight battles that couldn't be won. So she set the dessert tray down and wiped her hands on her apron. "I'll try," she said quietly. The billionaire leaned back in his chair, smiling as if he had just won a small victory. "Good. Just something simple. Chopsticks or twinkle twinkle, whatever a beginner can handle." More laughter. She turned away so no one would see the flicker of pain in her eyes. Even after all these years, music was still a tender place inside her chest. Something she didn't talk about. Something she didn't show. It used to be her whole world once. But life had pushed her in a different direction, and she had learned to keep her past hidden dot as she walked slowly toward the piano. She felt the weight of memories she tried so hard to forget. Her childhood lessons, her long evenings practicing scales, the dreams she once carried, the competitions she entered, the mistakes, the promises she made to herself. And the day she finally let it all go, because life left her no other choice, she reached the piano and stood there for a moment, staring at the keys. Her fingers twitched. She hadn't touched a real piano in years. She wasn't even sure she remembered how to play anything more than a simple tune. Behind her, the room buzzed with low whispers. She could feel the doubt radiating from the tables. People were ready to laugh if she messed up. They expected an awkward performance, something they could talk about later as a funny story. She knew it. She felt it deeply. Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled out the bench and sat. She ran her fingers lightly across the keys. They were cool and smooth, just like she remembered. For a moment, she didn't move. She just breathed. She told herself one thing: just play something simple. Do what he asked. Get through it. Go back to work. But even thinking that made her chest tighten. Music was never something she could do halfway. When she was younger, she used to lose herself completely in it. Every emotion found a home in the notes she played. And though she tried to bury that part of herself, it still lived inside her, quiet but not gone. She pressed one key softly. A single note floated through the room. Weak, alone. She closed her eyes. Another key. Then another. A small melody began to form. She heard a few guests whispering, probably thinking she sounded rusty. Maybe she did. Maybe they were right. But something inside her pushed forward, like a door she had kept locked for too long was slowly opening again. Her fingers slowly remembered shapes they once knew. Chords she used to practice until her hands were sore. A rhythm her heart understood better than words. The room's chatter faded a little, as if the sound of the piano created a small bubble around her. She still felt nervous, but also a strange warmth spreading through her chest. It felt like she was reconnecting with a part of herself she thought she had lost forever. She didn't look back at the tables. She didn't need to. She could feel the shift in the air. People were starting to listen. She kept the melody simple, just like she was told, but her hands began moving with more confidence. She let the music guide her, not the billionaire's expectations or the weight of all the eyes watching her. For the first time in a long while, she felt something familiar: peace, maybe, or relief, or simply the feeling of being herself again. And she didn't know it yet, but this small, hesitant beginning would soon lead into something none of the guests expected. Something that would make the room fall completely silent. Something that would change the way they looked at her forever. The melody she played at first was small and shaky, like someone learning to walk again after years of forgetting how. She kept her eyes on the keys, afraid that if she looked up and saw the people watching, she would freeze and lose whatever little courage she had gathered. Her fingers pressed gently, almost cautiously, as if the piano might break if she pushed too hard. The room was still not fully quiet. Some guests continued talking softly, not taking her seriously. A few chuckled, thinking she was just another nervous waitress being forced to do something she didn't want to do. But slowly, little by little, the sound of the piano began to rise above the talking. People paused without realizing it, their attention drawn to something they didn't expect. She felt it too, the small shift in the room. It wasn't silence yet, but it was the beginning of something. Even so, fear tugged at her. She wondered if they could see her hands trembling. She wondered if they noticed the way her shoulders tightened every time she hit a wrong note. The billionaire was watching her, leaning back in his chair with a smirk, waiting for her to embarrass herself. She could almost feel his amusement from across the room. She swallowed and tried to steady her breathing. She told herself she was only doing this because she had no choice. She told herself she didn't care what they thought. But deep inside, a very old part of her wished she could show them who she really was. She hadn't planned to play anything meaningful. Her original intention was to tap out a few simple notes, bow politely, and hurry back to work. But the moment her fingers touched the keys, something inside her shifted, something she hadn't felt in years, that it was like opening a window in a dusty room. A rush of old memories came with the cool air. She saw herself as a child, sitting on a wooden stool with her legs too short to touch the ground. She remembered how her teacher would gently tap her wrist, correcting her posture. She remembered the long walks home after practice, replaying her mistakes in her head, but feeling proud anyway. Her hands began to move with a little more confidence. The melody smoothed out, flowing more naturally now. Someone near the front whispered, "Wait, she can actually play." Another voice answered, "I thought she was joking." Even the billionaire raised an eyebrow. The smirk on his face faded just a little, but she didn't know any of this. She didn't dare look up. She kept her focus locked on the keys, telling herself to just breathe and keep going. She felt the familiar tension in her fingers slowly melt away as the music pulled her deeper in. For a moment, she forgot about the restaurant. She forgot about the guests, the noise, the billionaire, and the pressure. She forgot about her apron and the stack of dishes she still had to clean later. All she felt were the keys beneath her fingers, and the soft, rising sound that echoed in her chest dot. It felt good. Too good. Like touching a piece of her past she thought had disappeared forever, but she also felt the weight of hesitation. She kept fighting the urge to play something more, something deeper. She knew she could. Her hands remembered things she tried to forget, but she worried that if she let herself go too far, the memories might hurt more than they healed. Still, her fingers wandered into slightly more complex patterns. Nothing too advanced, but enough to make people pay attention. Enough to make the room fall quieter. Enough to make her heart beat faster with a mix of fear and hope. Someone from the back whispered, "Why is she even a waitress?" Another replied, "Maybe she didn't have a choice." Words like that were not meant to be heard by her, but somehow they reached her, slipping through the tiny cracks in the growing silence. And surprisingly, they didn't hurt. Instead, they lit something inside her, something she thought had gone out years ago. She continued playing, letting the melody breathe and stretch. The billionaire tapped his finger on the table, his expression unreadable. Maybe he was annoyed that the room was no longer laughing. Maybe he felt challenged in a way he didn't expect. He had wanted a moment of amusement at her expense. Instead, he was watching a moment he couldn't control. But still, she didn't look toward him. She only felt the shift in the air, the way the laughter had died, the way conversations had faded into silence. It was strange. It made her more nervous and more confident at the same time. She took a gentle pause, letting the last note fade into the air. A few people leaned forward, expecting her to stop completely. She could have ended right there. It would have been safe. No one would have blamed her. She had already surprised them, but something kept her hands on the keys. Maybe it was the way the piano felt under her fingertips. Maybe it was the memory of how happy she once was when she played. Or maybe it was simply the first time in a long time someone was listening, not judging her for not being enough, but being silent because she was more than they expected. She took a deeper breath this time, her shoulders lowering as she let go of some of the tightness inside. She began again, this time with a smoother, warmer tone. The melody flowed naturally, like a story she had been waiting to tell. A hush fell completely over the guests. It wasn't forced. It wasn't because they felt obligated. It was because the sound pulled them in, quieting their thoughts and softening their faces. Even the servers who were working nearby paused for a second, glancing toward her with surprise. Her fingers danced slowly, shaping each note with care. She wasn't performing. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was simply remembering what it felt like to let music speak for her. Across the room, the billionaire slowly crossed his arms. His expression was no longer playful. Something had shifted in his eyes, a flicker of curiosity, maybe even confusion. He didn't expect this from her. He didn't expect her to be good. And part of him didn't know how to react to something he couldn't control with money or commands. She didn't see him. She didn't see anyone. She was lost inside the sound. But the room saw her, every person in the restaurant. Whether they came for business or pleasure, whether they respected the staff or looked down on them, found themselves drawn into the same quiet moment. She paused again, letting the music settle. Her heart was beating quickly now, not from fear, but from emotion she couldn't explain. It felt like the past was sitting right beside her, whispering memories she wasn't ready to face. She knew she couldn't keep playing too long. Her manager would worry. The kitchen needed her. Her section still had guests waiting for dessert. Reality was waiting behind her, ready to pull her back, but for just a little longer. She wanted to hold on to this feeling, the feeling of being someone other than a tired waitress struggling to keep up with bills and responsibilities. So she decided to play one more soft phrase, a small melody she used to practice late at night when everyone else was asleep. It was simple but full of her heart. She played it gently, letting it slip into the quiet room like a whisper of who she once was. When the final note faded, it lingered for a moment, almost as if the room didn't want to let it go. She kept her hands resting on the keys, afraid to move or break the moment. Then she finally looked up, and what she saw made her breath catch. The room was completely still. Every face turned toward her. No laughter, no smirking, no mocking smiles. Just silence, deep, respectful silence. It startled her. She didn't know how to take it. She had spent so long hiding this part of herself that seeing people look at her that way felt unreal. Someone near the front slowly leaned forward and whispered, "She's really good." Another person nodded, not taking their eyes off her. For the first time all night, the billionaire didn't speak. He didn't smile. He didn't laugh. He just stared, studying her as if he was seeing her for the first time. She felt her cheeks warm, not with embarrassment this time, but with something softer, something like pride mixed with disbelief. She stood slowly from the bench, her legs almost shaky. She didn't bow or smile. She just stepped back quietly, unsure what came next. The guests, still stunned, watched her walk away from the piano. She didn't hear applause. Not yet. The room was too surprised to react. But silence, in that moment, felt louder than any clapping could have been. As she headed back toward the kitchen, she felt her heart beating fast. She couldn't understand what had just happened. All she had wanted was to get through a simple tune and go back to work. But somehow, the moment had turned into something else, something bigger, something she couldn't explain. And even though she didn't know it yet, this was only the beginning. What she played tonight had stirred something in the guests, something in the billionaire, and something deep inside herself. The night was far from over, and everything around her was about to change in ways she never expected. She walked back toward the kitchen with her heart pounding, unsure what she should feel. She tried to steady her breath, but the air around her felt different, heavier in a way she couldn't explain. She had only played a simple melody, nothing special, nothing close to what she used to be capable of. But the silence in the room when she finished replayed in her mind over and over again. It didn't feel like the same silence that came from people being bored or unimpressed. It felt like the kind of stillness that comes when people are holding their breath without realizing it. She slipped behind the kitchen door and leaned against the wall, closing her eyes for a moment. The sounds of sizzling pans and clattering dishes filled her ears, grounding her back into the world she knew, the world where she was just a tired waitress trying to get through her shift. But even in the busy kitchen, she could still feel the echo of the piano keys in her fingertips. One of the cooks looked up from the grill. "You okay?" he asked, wiping sweat from his forehead. She nodded quickly. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just needed a second." He shook his head with a small laugh. "We heard some of it from in here. Didn't know you could play like that." She smiled weakly. "I didn't know I could anymore either." Before the cook could say anything else, the manager rushed into the kitchen. His face was pale, not from anger, but from shock. "Where did you learn to play like that?" he asked, almost breathless. She frowned. I don't know. I just played something I remembered." The manager didn't respond right away. He kept looking at her as if trying to figure out if she was the same person he had worked with all these months. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Well, they want you to come back out." Her heart stopped. "Why? I already played." "They want more," he said. "The guests are asking." She blinked slowly. More? The word felt too big for her mouth. She wasn't ready for that. She had expected the audience to laugh or clap half-heartedly and then forget about her. But now they wanted another song? She had already pushed herself far beyond what she planned. She wasn't even sure her hands could keep steady. The manager gently put a hand on her shoulder. "Listen, just go for a moment. Play something short. The billionaire looks interested. And when a man like him is interested, we don't argue." There it was again, the pressure to obey, to please, to survive. Part of her wanted to run out the back door, take off her apron, and disappear. Another part of her, the part she didn't want to acknowledge, felt a small spark of something like hope. Or maybe it was fear disguised as hope. She wasn't sure. She took a slow breath and nodded. "All right. Let me put my apron away." When she stepped back into the dining room, she felt dozens of eyes latch onto her immediately. The chatter had died down again, though this time the silence felt more focused, more expectant. She walked calmly, trying not to look at anyone, even though she could feel their stares follow her. The billionaire watched her closely. His expression wasn't mocking anymore. It was sharp and thoughtful, the kind of look someone gives when they're trying to understand something unexpected. He tapped his glass lightly. "Back so soon," he said, his voice softer than before. "We were hoping you had another piece in you." She nodded politely. She didn't trust herself to speak without her voice shaking. "Well then," he said, gesturing toward the piano, "surprise us." She didn't say anything. She only walked toward the piano, her steps steady even though her heart was racing. The bench creaked softly as she sat down. She placed her hands on the keys but didn't press anything yet. This time, she didn't feel afraid of the piano. She felt afraid of everything else. What if she disappointed them now that they expected something better? What if she messed up? What if they liked the first melody only, because they didn't expect anything decent from a waitress, and now that they expected more, she failed. But then she reminded herself of something. She didn't owe them perfection. She didn't owe them anything except honesty. Music had always been the one place where she didn't need to pretend. So she let her fingertips rest on the keys and waited for her breath to steady. Slowly, she began to play again this time, a melody with more shape, more emotion. It wasn't dramatic or loud. It wasn't something meant to impress. It was gentle and warm, with soft rises and falls like waves brushing against the shore. The room, once again, shifted into silence. She could feel the audience deepening into their quiet, sinking into the sound. She didn't have to look up to know they were watching her with different eyes now. The pressure of their attention didn't scare her this time. Instead, it felt like a soft blanket, supporting her rather than crushing her. Her hands moved more confidently now, guided by memories that felt both old and new at the same time. She didn't rush through the notes. She let them stretch and breathe, trusting the music to carry her where she needed to go. A woman in the second row covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes wide with emotion. A man beside her whispered something softly, but the woman didn't respond. She was listening too deeply. The billionaire leaned forward. He wasn't smirking. He wasn't amused. He looked like someone who had forgotten where he was. His fingers stopped tapping. His lips parted slightly. Something in the music touched him, maybe something he didn't show often. She didn't think about any of this as she played. She didn't think about anything at all. She just let go. Her hands moved with a freedom she hadn't felt since she was young. She played not to impress them, not to please them, but because a part of her needed to feel alive again. As the melody softened, she slowed down. Her fingers hovered over the keys before pressing the final note, a long, gentle tone that floated in the room like a whisper. She let it linger before lifting her hands slowly off the piano. Another silence filled the room, but this one felt warm, heavy with emotion. She turned her head slightly and saw that almost everyone was staring at her with amazement. Their expressions were softer now, full of something she didn't often receive from strangers. Respect. Then came the sound of applause. Not loud or chaotic, but steady and sincere. People clapped not because they were supposed to, but because they wanted to. The sound filled the room gently, almost humbly, as if they didn't want to break the spell she had created. Her throat tightened. She wasn't used to being seen like this. She stood slowly, unsure what to do. The applause continued until the billionaire raised his hand, and the room grew quiet again. He looked at her, his eyes thoughtful and steady. "Who taught you to play like that?" he asked. She hesitated before answering. "I learned when I was young. I practiced a lot." "And you just stopped?" he asked. She nodded lightly. Life got in the way. He studied her for a long moment. His voice wasn't mocking or playful anymore. It was calm, almost gentle. "You have a gift," he said. "A rare one." She didn't know how to respond. Compliments from him felt too heavy, too unreal. Before she could say anything, someone from his group added, "She should be performing, not serving." Another guest nodded. "She has real talent." She felt her face warm, and she lowered her eyes. "Thank you. I should get back to my tables now." The billionaire lifted his hand again, stopping her gently. "Wait." The room grew still once more. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small card, placing it on the table. "Come see me after your shift." Her stomach tightened. She had no idea what he wanted. An offer? A lecture? Something good or something dangerous? "I'd like to talk to you," he said. "About your future." The words hit her like a wave. Talk about her future? When was the last time anyone had even thought about her future? She nodded slowly. "All right, you may go for now," he added, leaning back. She turned and walked away, her legs slightly unsteady. She didn't look back. She didn't want them to see how overwhelmed she felt. As she reached the hallway behind the dining room, she paused, pressing a hand to her heart. It was beating fast, not from fear, but from something far more confusing. Hope that something had changed in that room. Something had shifted inside her. And even though she didn't know what would happen next, she felt the path ahead of her bending in a direction she never thought she'd walk again. She wasn't the same waitress who walked into work that evening. Something inside her had awakened, and there was no going back. And she had no idea what waited for her after her shift. But the night was far from over. The air inside the hall felt heavier than before, as if everyone waiting there sensed something important was about to happen. After the performance she had given earlier, the room's mood had completely changed. People who had previously shrugged her off or glanced at her in annoyance were now whispering to each other, trying to make sense of what they had seen. She stood quietly near the side of the room, not drawing attention to herself, though almost everyone kept looking at her. Even she didn't fully understand why the moment felt so serious. But deep inside, she sensed that things were slowly beginning to shift. She tried to keep her mind calm, but her heart was still beating faster than usual. Life had never made things easy for her, and even this good moment came wrapped in a strange mix of excitement and doubt. She didn't want to expect too much. She didn't want to assume that this sudden respect from strangers would last. But remembering the sound of the piano still made her smile. For a long time, she had hidden that part of her life because the world around her seemed uninterested, even dismissive. Now, unexpectedly, people were seeing her differently. It felt unreal. Across the hall, the man who had first asked her to play stood frozen in place. Earlier, he had spoken to her in a tone that carried no kindness. He hadn't meant to be cruel, at least she hoped not, but he had spoken to her as if she were incapable of anything meaningful. She remembered the dismissive expression in his eyes, and she had felt embarrassed at first. But the moment she sat at the piano, all of that faded away. She didn't play to prove herself to him or anyone else. She played simply because music lived inside her, and she wanted to let it out. Now he stood there facing her, but this time his face held a completely different expression. He didn't look annoyed anymore. He didn't look impatient. He looked stunned, almost unsure of himself. A few moments passed before he slowly walked toward her. She noticed that even his steps had changed. Instead of the confident, almost arrogant stride he had earlier, he now moved with more care, as if he were afraid of saying the wrong thing. When he reached her, he stopped and cleared his throat, but the words didn't come out right away. She stayed silent, giving him the space to speak. Around them, a few people continued whispering, but the room had grown quieter, as if everyone was waiting for his response. Finally, he spoke softly. "I didn't know you could play like that," he said, almost whispering. "I mean, I don't think anyone here knew." She didn't react right away. She wasn't angry at him, but she didn't want to make it too easy for him either. She had spent years dealing with moments like this, moments when someone underestimated her, only to be surprised later. She didn't need an apology, though she respected sincerity. More than anything, she just wanted to be treated like someone who mattered. "It's fine," she said calmly. "You didn't have to know." He looked down briefly. "I'm sorry," he said, "for the way I spoke to you earlier. It wasn't fair." His apology was genuine, and she accepted it with a small nod. The tension between them softened a little, though the room still felt warm with curiosity. A few people approached her, asking questions about her music, about how long she had been playing, about where she had learned. They weren't pushy, just amazed. She answered politely, but didn't go too deep into her past. Some memories were too personal to share with strangers, as more people gathered around. She felt both overwhelmed and strangely proud. No one had seen her this way in a very long time. They saw talent. They saw skill. They saw someone worth paying attention to. She wasn't used to that kind of recognition, but she welcomed it quietly. One older woman stepped forward and looked at her with gentle eyes. "My dear, you have a gift," she said softly. "You played with so much feeling. It reminded me of someone I used to know." The woman's kind words touched her more deeply than she expected. She thanked her with a warm smile, and for a brief moment, she felt seen, truly seen, as if someone understood more than the surface of her talent. Gradually, the crowd began drifting back to their seats. The hall lights dimmed slightly, signaling that the program was continuing. But even as people returned to their places, their eyes kept drifting back to her. She didn't want to make a scene, so she quietly stepped aside, trying to blend back into the background. But it didn't feel the same as before. She wasn't invisible anymore. She found a quiet corner where she could breathe and gather her thoughts. The weight of the evening sat on her shoulders, but it was a warm kind of weight. The kind that reminded her she had done something meaningful. The kind that made her aware that life sometimes changes in ways we never expect on. As she stood there, she remembered the years when music had been her escape. She remembered the small apartment where she taught herself to play with a broken keyboard someone had thrown away. She remembered practicing late at night while everyone else slept, letting the soft sound guide her away from loneliness. She remembered being told that dreams didn't pay bills, that music was a hobby, not a future. She remembered choosing to set that part of her life aside because responsibility demanded it. Tonight reopened all those memories. A soft voice broke her thoughts. "I hope you're staying for the rest of the evening." It was the man again. He stood a few steps behind her, his expression now calmer, almost humble. "I'll stay," she said. "It's fine." He nodded. "Good. I just wanted to say again, what you did was incredible." She gave a small smile. "Thank you." They stood quietly for a moment, and then he stepped back, giving her space, something he hadn't done earlier. It felt like his way of showing respect. While the event continued, she remained thoughtful. She wasn't thinking about the applause, or the whispers, or the sudden attention. She was thinking about what the piano still meant to her. Even after everything she had been through, the music was still there, waiting for her, ready to speak whenever she let it. When the program finally ended, people slowly exited the hall, but many stopped to offer her warm smiles or quiet comments. She didn't feel overwhelmed anymore. Instead, she felt strangely peaceful. Outside, the night air was cool. She stepped into the open, feeling the fresh breeze wash over her. The sky above was dark, but scattered with faint stars, and she took a slow breath as she realized something important. Tonight was more than a moment of unexpected recognition. It was a reminder that talent doesn't disappear just because the world ignores it. A reminder that some gifts stay with us even when life pushes us in different directions. She walked slowly through the quiet street, her mind full but calm. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, she felt a small spark of hope waking up inside her. Maybe she didn't need to hide her music anymore. Maybe she didn't need to shrink herself just to fit into the expectations of others. Maybe tonight was the beginning of something new. She didn't need applause. She didn't need fame. All she needed was the freedom to be herself. And for the first time in years, she felt that freedom gently rising inside her, shaping her steps as she disappeared into the night. The room was still filled with quiet murmurs when she sat back on the piano bench, unsure of what would happen next. She had no idea how long she had played or how deeply the music had reached the people around her. All she knew was that her hands were still shaking slightly, not from fear anymore, but from the weight of everything that had just happened. The sound of the last note still echoed in her mind, soft and warm, like something she had needed to hear for years. As she stood up, people began to gather around her, offering kind words she never expected to hear. Some said they had never heard anything so touching. Others simply stood quietly, as if they were still trying to understand how a waitress from a busy restaurant had just filled the room with something so powerful. She tried to smile, but she was overwhelmed, and her thoughts kept circling around one simple question. What now? She took a small step back, wanting to return to her work and hide behind the safety of routine. But the billionaire approached her before she could move away. His expression was completely different from before. Earlier he had been amused, almost careless, as if asking her to play had been nothing more than part of his evening entertainment. But now his face held a seriousness she hadn't seen before, along with something that looked like genuine respect. He told her the room had been changed by her music. He said even he had not expected to feel it, yet the moment she began playing, he knew he was listening to someone who carried a rare gift. She didn't know what to say. His words felt too big, too heavy for someone who had spent the past few years wiping tables, running orders, and folding napkins. She felt like a child again, standing in her small kitchen at home, learning piano on a second-hand keyboard her mother bought from a neighbor. When the billionaire asked where she had learned to play, she told him the truth. She explained how she had trained for years, how she used to practice late into the night, and how she once dreamed of joining a music academy. But life had changed when her family needed her to work. The long hours at different jobs, the constant pressure to make ends meet, and the reality of growing responsibilities had slowly pushed her dream to the side. The piano stayed with her only in the quiet moments when she imagined what could have been. The billionaire listened closely, not interrupting even once. For a man so used to leading the room, he seemed to understand that this time he needed to simply listen. When she finished speaking, he nodded slowly, as if every word she shared mattered more than she realized. Then he told her something she never expected. He said he wanted to help her return to the world she belonged in, the world of music. She blinked, almost unsure she had heard him correctly. He repeated himself, making it clear he was offering real support, not just polite words. He spoke about arranging training with someone who could guide her back to her skill level. He mentioned helping her get access to proper instruments, even opportunities to perform. The more he spoke, the more the room seemed to shift around her. It felt like a door she thought had been locked forever was opening again. But with that hope came fear. She wondered if she could really start over, if she could step into a world she had walked away from so long ago. She told him she didn't know if she was ready for something so big. He gently told her that talent, like hers, wasn't something that just disappeared. It simply waited until the right moment to shine again. And he believed that moment had arrived. People nearby nodded in agreement. A few staff members she worked with looked at her with pride in their eyes. They had always known she had something special, but even they had never seen her play like she did tonight. Their quiet support helped her breathe a little easier. It made her feel like she wasn't facing this decision alone. Finally, after taking a moment to gather her thoughts, she told the billionaire she would try. She didn't promise perfection or grand success. She just promised to try to give her dream one more chance. The billionaire smiled calmly, saying that trying was more than enough for now. The guests slowly returned to their seats, though many of them continued to watch her with curiosity and admiration. Her coworkers encouraged her, gently as she walked back toward the kitchen area. Her apron felt lighter somehow, as if the night had taken away a weight she didn't even realize she had been carrying. Later, after the event ended, she stepped outside into the cool night air. The streets were mostly quiet, and the city lights shimmered gently in the distance. She walked slowly, her steps soft but steady, replaying everything that had happened. It felt unreal that one simple request, a request she never wanted to accept, had led to a moment that changed her life. She remembered the faces in the room, the way the atmosphere shifted when they heard her play. She remembered the billionaire's voice, calm and sincere, offering her something she thought she would never have again, a chance. And for the first time in a very long time, she let herself imagine a future shaped not by what she had lost, but by what she still had within her. As she reached the corner of the street near her small apartment, she paused and looked up at the sky. She did not know where this new path would take her, or how difficult the journey might become. But she felt something steady inside her, a warmth that had been missing for years. It was the same warmth she felt whenever her fingers touched the piano keys. She walked the remaining distance with a quiet smile, understanding that her life had taken an unexpected turn, one she was beginning to welcome. Tomorrow might bring challenges, new lessons, and unfamiliar responsibilities, but tonight she allowed herself to feel hopeful. The song she played would stay in the minds of everyone who heard it, but it would stay with her even longer. It reminded her of who she truly was. And from that moment on, she promised herself something simple yet powerful. She would not let her gift fade again. Her journey was no longer paused. It had begun again, gently but surely, one note at a time.